Hare Krishna, Yogesvara Prabhu.
Oh, I recognize that voice.
Are you able to see my face too?
See your effulgent face as well. I do.
Oh, what a pity. Nice to see you, Prabhu.
Very well.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you for inviting me back to spend some time with your group, your Gita group.
Well, we're real happy to have you. It's an honor and a great opportunity for us to hear from you, learn from you, get enthused by you, and probably, I expect people will trail in over, as we go. Although ideally they're here now, but that would probably happen. But we could start now if you like, and then better not to wait for anyone else.
Sure, that's fine. We've got 5 people. That's a quorum.
I think there's one more. It's about to be 6. You'll see in a second.
Oh, well, now don't push and shove. There's room enough for everybody here. I know it's such a nice afternoon. It doesn't surprise me. People probably want to be outside.
Well,
I found Urada there. She's building a temple.
Very cool. Yeah, I think we had the very best attendance for about the first 5 months of the pandemic. That was the very best attendance, because people didn't want to go outside, So then as things started to clear up, then there was less, because people could go out to do whatever. And then also now we compete, so to speak, with temples that are having programs in person. But I'm happy to do it the way we're doing it for now.
That's fine.
And also 26 Second Avenue is kind of a tight spot. So I think this is best for now.
Well, I'm here to serve and be of whatever help I can offer. So if you want, we could read the verse and begin.
Yeah. Would you like to chant Hare Krishna for a moment or two first?
Oh, you missed out. We had a rousing kirtan just.
Okay.
I mean, you should have seen Bhakta Sashi was bouncing off the walls, and it was raucous. I'm telling you.
Everyone had their instruments at home in their respective homes.
Oh, the walls were shaking.
Okay, yeah. So please do begin with the verse then.
Okay, so this is Bhagavad-gita, 2nd chapter. Text 61. Yeah, we're starting with 61. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So the Sanskrit for this verse is as follows. Tani sarvani samyamya yukta asita matparaha vashe hi yasyendriyani tasya pragya pratishtata. And the translation of those words is as follows. Tani means those senses. Sarvani, all. Sarva, the word sarva should be familiar by now, meaning everything or all. Samyamya, keeping under control. Yukta, engaged. That's another word you should become familiar with. Yukta vairagya, properly engaged renunciation. Yukta. Asita should be situated. Matpara, in relationship with me, Vashe, in full subjugation. He certainly, Yasya, one whose, Indriyani, senses, Tasya, is, Pragya, consciousness, Pratishtita, fixed. So here's the translation of chapter 2, text 21. One who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me is known as a man of steady intelligence. Purport. I'll read part of the purport, it's a bit lengthy. That the highest conception of yoga perfection is Krishna consciousness is clearly explained in this verse. And unless one is Krishna conscious, it is not at all possible to control the senses. As cited above, the great sage Durvasa Muni picked a quarrel with Maharaj Ambarish, and Durvasa Muni unnecessarily became angry out of pride and therefore could not check this, his senses. On the other hand, the king, although not as powerful a yogi as the sage, but a devotee of the Lord, silently tolerated all the sage's injustices and thereby emerged victorious. So there's some interesting points here. First of all, I think it bears mentioning that Arjuna was a very advanced yogi. He wasn't a novice. He wasn't a beginner. And yet here is Krishna offering him very elementary instruction. There's nothing particularly complicated or evolved, sophisticated about these teachings here. They're the ABCs of spiritual life. You know, control your senses, control your mind, engage in thinking of me. You have to ask yourself, why is it that Krishna would offer Arjuna, a very advanced yogi? Arjuna is so advanced that later, after he witnesses the universal form, he goes into this very profound Vedantic description of Krishna. Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram, Paramam Bhava. Rather mature understanding of the nature of creation. So it might be a little confusing here. But part of the explanation is that Arjuna was in a very troubled state of mind. He was literally beside himself. He couldn't remember his name. His palms were sweating. His mind was reeling. He had to sit down. He couldn't even stand on his chariot anymore. And it was, we used to call it a nervous breakdown. He was having a crisis mode. So the first thing that Krishna is doing before he can get to more progressive instruction is to calm him down. He's just calming him down. He wants him to be in a frame of mind where he is open to understanding the more sophisticated material that will be described later in the Bhagavad-gita. That's pretty much a good description of everyone beginning their spiritual life. Very rarely do we find someone who starts at a very advanced stage. Usually it's at that beginning level of watching your diet, looking out for things that are harmful to your spiritual life, keep good company, have a regular program, a daily sadhana practice. And then once you've prepared yourself for receiving higher knowledge, then it becomes possible to access those deeper levels of discussion. So one part of the explanation for why Krishna would be explaining an advanced devotee principles of beginning bhakti is because Arjuna wasn't ready. He was too agitated. He was too distressed. And it's interesting. I'm always excited and honored to be invited to talk with Atmanivedana's group there at 26 Second Avenue, because it's where everything started. It has a revered place in the minds of devotees around the world. And from 26, we've been able to observe the growth and the maturation of Prabhupada's mission around the world. And I'm invited to speak frequently at other temple venues. A lot of it is Zoom these days. And what I find is, and I'm going to open this up early to discussion, so that's why I'm going this way. What I find is that people generally don't have questions about the verse. They don't have a lot of issues with what's being said. Usually their interests or their concerns are on a more personal level. No one's going to argue with the foundational ideas of the Bhagavad-gita, that the individual living being is not the physical body or mind, but the eternal soul, the consciousness that animates the body. We reincarnate from one life to another according to our merit or karmic allotment. The activities of this life develop the physical shape that we will take in the next life. That there is a indwelling aspect of divinity in our hearts called Paramatma that is observing and offering instruction, and that yoga practice is meant for purifying our receptors so that we can hear those instructions being offered by Paramatma, super soul within the heart. And that when one comes to the fruition, to the blossoming of spiritual practice, there's a direct communion with the source of all creation, Sri Krishna. And that anyone who's familiar with the Bhagavad Gita has no problem with those basic teachings. The problem that arises seems to be, at least from my experience, on a more, you might say, existential level. What is that? Well, a lot of people seem to have a hard time connecting these teachings. Like this verse, for example, one who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control. Fixes his consciousness upon me, is known as a man of steady intelligence. Well, okay, people don't have a problem with that. What they have, what's more challenging is they're not sure how to integrate the life they're living with the ideal life that's described in the Bhagavad Gita. Very, very challenging exercise. I've had people in confidence say to me that they didn't even want to be this kind of a person. They didn't feel themselves either equipped or disposed or interested in becoming such an elevated exemplar of devotional life. People's challenges, the ones that they deal with on a daily basis, are not philosophical issues of personal versus impersonal, or whether we're meant to engage in action as opposed to knowledge. They're real life issues. How do I pay my bills? What do I do about the fact that my child has left home and I don't know what her fate is? My partner has a drug addiction. There are real Kali Yuga stuff going on out there. And so the conversations very quickly tend to move away from philosophical issues to real nitty-gritty, living life issues. There was a conversation the other day with a business group, an international organization. They have something like, I think, 3,000 employees around the world. And the questions were, how do we communicate with senior management when we're worried that if we actually speak our minds, if we report what it is that we're seeing happening in the company, we might lose our job. Maybe I'll be seen as a troublemaker, or my colleagues will be angry with me because I'm rocking the boat, making it hard for everybody. Or I don't want to be ridiculed. I don't want to be made fun of. I don't want to be told, you've got it all wrong. And all of a sudden I've lost credibility with my boss. Of course, the big issue is, I need my job. I have to pay my bills. So I'm not going to do anything that's going to jeopardize that. That's real life stuff. There we're not debating nirguna versus saguna Brahman, or the subtleties of bhakti theology. Most people are dealing with real stuff. I don't like my life. What do I do? What do I do about that? Well, I'm feeling lonely. But the Bhagavad-gita says, control your senses. What if I don't want to control my senses? What if I want to come home and curl up in bed next to somebody who loves me and who will, cuddle with me and make me feel good? Does that make me a bad person? Does that make me a bad devotee because I want that? That's a good question. So I have an idea, and my idea is, because I don't get to be with you all very often, I want to open the conversation up early tonight, rather than talking about the ins and outs of these verses. And by the way, the next few verses coming up here are absolutely astonishing. It's when Krishna describes for Arjuna how, while contemplating the objects of the senses, this is the next verse, a person develops attachment, and from attachment, kama, lust develops. We'd have to describe what kama means. And from lust, anger arises. This is an insightful description of human psychology, of how we use the word entangled very often to mean sometimes compulsive behavior, obsessive behavior, an inability to refrain from self-harm. Absolutely brilliant description in the next few verses. But I think rather than going into the specifics of these verses, I'm just going to stop here. I'm going to open up the floor to you all, and I'm going to ask what's on your mind. Let's talk about what's important to you. What's been happening since we saw each other last? I'm not quite sure if we're actually seeing each other. But what's been happening since we were together last? I think, what was it? I've been evading a month, 2 months back? Can't quite recall. So I'll be happy to answer your question. It was longer than that? All right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just, is that okay with you? If we open this up to discussion earlier tonight?
Oh, that's it. I think it's a great idea, Prabhu. Thank you.
Okay, well, whoever you are out there, and I don't know all of you, you're welcome to unmute your phone. You're welcome to, if you wish to remain anonymous, you can type your question in the chat box. But well, I think we're among friends here. So why don't you tell me what's important to you just now, and let's talk about that. See, sometimes it's a little difficult to actually come clean, and talk about the things that are important to you. But that's ultimately where all this is meant to go. Where we're meant to go is less about discussions of, Arjuna is asking Krishna earlier in this chapter, well, what does a self-realized soul look like, and how do they stand? How do they walk? And Krishna is describing, well, when you really have achieved some spiritual understanding, you won't be so concerned about all the different prescriptions in the texts. So all of that's important. That's good. I'm not trying to minimize it. But ultimately, Krishna consciousness is about opening our hearts and a willingness to discuss the things that stand between us and making the progress that we want in our spiritual life. So it can be something about the verse if you like, but I'm perfectly willing to discuss other things with you. And if nobody has anything to say, I'll have to dig into memory and come up with a couple of bad jokes. So who wants to start? Gaurav, are you volunteering? You're muted though, so I can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was technical.
Very good. Yeah, I was trying for a long time, and then so yeah, I really liked it. What you said, it's I was kind of having this question: is it more important to understand the shastras, or is it more important to be like at peace with ourselves and practice at our own level? Like I may not be following the 4 regulative principles, but like trying to like spread at least, like I found a certain peace with this process. So is it more important to like get more into the scholarly, like the shastras and the practices, or is it like just more important to be like at peace with myself and trying to give like others this message at our level? Because like you mentioned, I think with the example of like having a partner, and a lot of people, I think they're not receptive to like this like strict brahmacharya, but but they're like more receptive to the the message. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I got a little confused, but I think I mixed up. But is it like is it like the inner peace? Is it some kind of a barometer of like spiritual advancement? And
Well, you could say that. You could say that the more you advance spiritually, the more the guidelines of behavior, devotional behavior, become easier to follow. But I do find that a lot of people carry a huge amount of guilt about not being able to follow the principles of initiation. That there's a way of understanding these principles that might make it a wee bit easier. We have 4 basic guidelines that are the kind of the threshold for initiation. Maybe, I don't know if it's the easiest one, which is no gambling. I don't know. I haven't met too many people who have had a hard time with the gambling restriction. That hasn't been a big issue for too many people. The next easiest one, you might say, or the one that seems to be that causes the less amount of guilt is a vegetarian diet, because that's just healthy. And if you know how to cook vegetarian, you don't really have to sacrifice a lot for that one. One that does cause a bit of difficulty is the prescription against drugs, alcohol, technically coffee, tea, and cigarettes as well. There's been some, we might say, cultural accommodation about coffee and tea. Cigarettes are still a no-no. And then the most difficult one is sexual restraint, limiting sex activity to a life partner, someone to whom you've committed for life. And some of the questions that I get are, well, how do I know if I'm compatible with this person if I'm not allowed to be intimate with them? How do I know that, we fit well together? We're just supposed to read the Bhagavad-gita, and based on that, we're supposed to get married. I mean, is that a good idea? Or someone else may say, look, one person say to me, I'm Italian. I've been drinking wine since before I knew how to walk. It's no big deal. In Italy, you get a loaf of bread and a bottle of wine, you're good for the day, So there are these kind of cultural, local specifics or peculiarities. And if you're not able to do that, becomes a source of a lot of guilt. And guilt is a very toxic thing. You carry that around with you. It really can affect everything. So there's been quite a bit of discussion around this. Younger devotees approaching senior devotees asking, what do I do about these things? Rather than getting too deep into any one particular point of view on this, I would just encourage everyone that if that shoe fits you and you are having some challenging moments with the basic principles, find someone you're comfortable with and talk about it. The last thing that you want to do is let that fester. You don't want that remaining unaddressed longer than necessary, because then it's just going to get worse and you're going to feel worse as well. So, forgive yourself for not being, this perfect devotee described in the Bhagavad-gita. Nobody is. And be a little bit practical, pragmatic about it. And you will find that there are groups, support groups out there, and it's a wonderful thing to see. We didn't have that in the first generation. And when I was growing up in Krishna consciousness, I think we were too embarrassed, actually, to talk about, well, I've got this problem, or I've got that problem, I have a hard time giving this up. And, these days I'm privy to a lot of private discussions, and I know that there are very, very effective support groups out there. And it's the healthiest thing in the world is to talk about what's going on in your life. Don't cover it up. If you're covering it up, then it's heavier than necessary. So, if I can be of any assistance, directing you toward one of these groups, I'll be happy to do so. But please know that you're not a bad person. You're not a bad devotee. If those basic guidelines are challenging for you, you are not alone. I mean, I know people who have been practicing Krishna consciousness for decades, and they still, they're still not on the straight and narrow when it comes to some of the principles. Are they bad people? Of course they're not bad people. Heck, this is Kali Yuga, and nobody has a particularly pretty story to tell. So I think we can be a little understanding and compassionate about that. So Gaurav, thanks for raising the question. Anyone else like to jump in here?
And now everyone should be able to unmute themselves if they want.
I thought that by observing Krishna, it sort of, sort of moves your problems, move away, and you become more balanced. And it's not necessarily by an act of will, but by a development or an unfolding that takes you to this place of a stable place and peaceful place.
Mhm.
It seems, am I right or am I wrong?
You are right. I mean, that answer is correct. It's not a comprehensive perspective, but it's not a wrong perspective. It's a fact that there is you might say, a natural movement away from harmful practices or, by the way, harmful practices can also be thought patterns. It's not just physical activity. It can be a way of thinking about things as well. You get stuck on a particular negative feedback loop, and that can be as harmful as drugs. But bear something in mind. In the 12 years that Srila Prabhupada was with us and growing the Krishna consciousness movement, he initiated something like 5,000 men and women disciples. Maybe half of them are still active to one degree or another. That's a dilemma. That's an interesting dilemma. How is it that even receiving initiation directly from Srila Prabhupada himself, people still, 1 out of every 2 people, statistically, didn't make it, so to speak. They moved away or they fell away from devotional practices. If it were just a matter of, well, chant Hare Krishna, Prabhu, and everything's going to be fine, then all 5,000 of those disciples would still be with us today. Clearly, something else is going on. Clearly, there's something more at work here. And usually what's at work is the effects of something from earlier in life. I talk about this quite a bit because I happen to believe in it very strongly. We are the aggregate product of our life's experiences. And my personal conviction, I'm not sure I can point to chapter and verse to support this, but it's worked well for me. My personal conviction is that the evidence that you've been chanting well is that you'll begin asking questions that will lead to resolving the things that stand between you and making further spiritual progress. So it's not necessarily directly the chanting itself, but the chanting as an impetus, as a motivation to looking more closely, more directly at I'll use this word, the pathology of our devotional life, so that we can begin to inquire more specifically, what's this all about? Why is it that I've been chanting for so long? I truly believe in this. I've given my life to it. This is still happening. Why is that still happening? My conviction is that chanting sincerely evokes an ability to confront those difficult hurdles and obstacles that otherwise we might be too afraid or unprepared or ill-equipped to confront. So the chanting can be, if you will, a stepping stone also toward that kind of again, I'll use this phrase advisedly, post-traumatic growth. It's a somewhat controversial area of psychology that says in the aftermath of very harsh experience, and we've all had harsh experience to one degree or another, you can emerge from that with a healthier disposition. How is that? Well, people who have been through traumatic experiences often find that they've discovered a new appreciation for life. They discover that in order to confront those very difficult circumstances, they were able to draw upon skills, resources, inner abilities that they never knew they had. They found an impetus to a new reason for moving on with their life, new interests, new passions, new pursuits, new goals. So there are many ways that one can emerge from tragedy, even from trauma. Those two things are not the same, by the way. With that kind of enhanced self-awareness. And I believe that chanting encourages that. Chanting prepares the ground for that greater self-awareness.
Well, I was talking about one of the verses in the Bhagavad-gita when it says frustration leads to anger, anger leads to
Yeah, that's in the next verse.
and it's and what precipitates anger is frustration. But if you go a little further before, is your needs, your desires, bring about problems. So a light bulb went on. And I said, well, this desires or needs that I have to get fulfilled, and I am in society because I think they're going to get fulfilled, are not really the things that are going to be fulfilled. And to me, that's not. When this happens, when you start feeling a little bit angry, a little bit frustrated, to me this is a sign that the path has to be changed. I no longer can use what I will call right now, because I don't, my needs I have to, and I call this transformation.
Right.
It has to be a transformative process.
Right. Well,
So-
Susan, can I call you Susan? by the
Yeah,
way?
of course.
Let me add one thing, if I may, because you've done a very good job of kind of spelling out the broad strokes of the pattern of behavior that Krishna is going to be describing in the next couple of verses. When Krishna talks about, while contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them, and from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger, what you were describing. He's talking about inappropriate attachments. The Bhagavad-gita does not condemn desire. This is a misunderstanding. Bhakti is not the negation of desire, it's the elevation of desire. It's the enhancement of desire through self-knowledge. So what Krishna is describing here, and I think I'm addressing what you were asking about, is the kind of attachment, the kind of urges, the kind of yearnings that are a detour away from healthy spiritual life. Now, that there again, there's no one definition of what's healthy and unhealthy desire. This is why, finding the right company is really critical.
Can I say something? I call this verse, the transformational verse. It's that you no longer can go out with this type of needs to society, to whatever was going on. It has to be transformed. And this is what I'm talking about. This is not a process of a straight jacket, because to me, this is the
Right, that'll just exacerbate it.
the last verse that we read is self-control and forbearance. The two examples are somebody lost it and somebody just took, just was able to, to endure it. So the message is, self-control and forbearance. But now and now we really interject this, we take it in, and inside of you goes, I should be self-controlled and forbearing. And so people are really not going to last very long if you put so many dictates in a person.
Sure. No, that's precisely what we've been discussing.
Is it a transformation process or not? And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, that's very good. That you put your finger on it. That's precisely what we've been discussing, and why it's so important that we have this kind of a dialogue. It's very easy to misconstrue what's being said, and then it becomes a kind of straitjacket on life, and that's never the intention. I've just been I've been working on a biography of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and it's given me an opportunity to read a lot of books, biographies and analyses by more recent scholars, some of the original memoirs, and the ecstasies that Chaitanya experienced are, they put the kind of sensual ecstasies that we identify with material life to shame. I mean, they're so extraordinary. Bhakti has never been a suppression of desire. It's more a matter of, how do you know what you really want if you haven't figured out who you are yet? If you're still uncertain about your core identity, what's the thing that moves you forward, then how can you determine what's a proper vocation, what's a proper partner for me, what's a proper balance of elements in my life? Yeah, so, Susan, you've really put your finger on something quite important. And, Atma Nivedana, I think at some point, this is worth a whole class in itself, is revisiting the regulative principles and some of the other guidelines of bhakti life in the light of a deeper definition of what is desire, what is a healthy comportment in the world. It's unfortunately, it's not given very much attention. And as a result, people feel that their back is up against the wall. I can't do this, I just can't do this. I'll never be like that. And so they think the only option is to go away. And that's tragic. That's so tragic. So no one should ever reach that point. So let's keep that on the table as an option for future discussion. So thank you, Susan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we? Is there anyone else who would like to join the discussion here? This is some good stuff.
Sure. I have a question about something you said, Prabhu. You were noting the sort of scales of difficulty on average for devotees in following each of the four regulative principles relative to one another, even after years and years of practicing devotional service. And I guess I was just wondering why that is then that, say, the regular principle of only having sex for the procreation of children, or the broader definition within marriage, but why is it that is more difficult than, say, restraining oneself from engaging in, having alcohol or certain other intoxicants? Because it's interesting question, because things like alcohol and certain other drugs, they're highly addictive. They're extremely addictive. And I mean, you know, even as a like as a youngster before I became a devotee, I know what it's like to for certain substances to have a hold on one, even when one endeavors to give it up. But then by practicing devotional service, when you take up devotional service, it didn't seem so hard to give that up. But it seems for practicing devotees that the fourth regular principle, if you call it that, the regulating sex life, that's more challenging. So I'm curious as to why, and maybe my curiosity is sort of, maybe it's missing the point of the discussion, because you're leading this discussion to be very practical. So maybe my question, it's not really.
No. It's a very valid question, and I let me not give a misimpression here. What I thought I had said was that, based on my own experience in discussions with people who have confided to me what the issues are that they're confronting, usually vegetarianism is less often a concern than drugs or sex. I was just kind of trying to put it on that kind of a scale. But by that same token, there are people, gambling is an addiction for some people, and they can't stop themselves. So that can also be a very, very difficult hurdle for people. And a vegetarian diet may be a very, very challenging thing for someone. I'll never forget a series on the Bhagavad-gita that I was asked to give at Integral Yoga, the Swami Satchidananda building, the ashram on 13th Street. And conversations came around to the regulative principles, and we were talking about a vegetarian diet. And a hand went up at the back of the room. And this person said, I really have to object. I'm coming here every week. I really enjoy these discussions about the Bhagavad-gita. I love chanting, but I'm really getting frustrated being made to feel like a second-class citizen here because I can't follow a vegetarian diet. I tried, and I was getting terribly sick. And I had several doctors tell me the same thing. That is, don't do this. Your body requires certain kinds of proteins and nutrients that you're just not going to get from the kind of diet you've been following. And I really object to always being made to feel like I'm a lesser participant here. So I didn't want to get into a debate about how maybe there are other doctors you can consult who could give you a different kind of menu that would provide you with what you need. But it was for me a very important lesson, because I can be very judgmental. I'll admit that. People say, "Oh, Yogesvara, you're so spiritual." I don't think so. And I have my prejudices and my shortcomings and my failings and my misconception, just like everybody else. The last thing I would do is hide that from anybody. And so for me, what that instance at Integral Yoga taught me was to get off my high horse, holier than thou, because I'm vegetarian and you're not, I mean, you remember that verse in the Bhagavad-gita that's coming up where Krishna says, an introspective sage sees as equal the learned Brahmin, an outcast, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater. Now, what is Krishna saying there, if not stop putting yourself over anybody else because they eat meat? Don't do that. An introspective sage knows better than to do that. An introspective sage sees that this person, no matter what their habits may be, that person is just as much an eternal spirit soul and my part and parcel and someone I love as you are. It's good to be reminded of these things sometimes. So that was a good lesson for me. Any other thoughts or questions? Maybe someone we haven't heard from yet who would like to speak up. We have a few minutes, yeah, Atma?
Sure, Prabhu. We have I mean, we could go through 7 if you like to. So as much time as you like here.
Well, let's see. I mean, if people are up for discussion, and there are some other things that some of the people who haven't spoken yet would maybe like to join in the talk, you're most welcome.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. This is Gail.
Hare Krishna, Gail.
I would just like to see if I misheard you when you said that, I think you said that there's no such thing as a bad desire. Did I hear that right?
Well, not exactly. What I was describing is that in these verses in the 2nd chapter, where Krishna talks to Arjuna about how if you dwell too long on something that you want, then you're going to develop an attachment for that thing. And then from that attachment, you're going to get, a really deep craving for it. And then you're going to get angry because usually you're not going to be able to get what you want. And he goes through what happens after that. When you get angry, then you lose your intelligence and everything goes awry. So what Krishna is pointing to there is the kind of focus on material objectives that aren't healthy. He's not saying, give up your yearning for me, because that's also a yearning. He's not saying give up your desire for serving in a particular way. He's not saying even give up your efforts to earn money. If you're looking to build a balanced devotional life, you have to earn money. You have to be able to pay your bills. Otherwise, you're going to be so distracted, you won't be able to do anything. So desire is not condemned. That was the point. It's those kinds of fixations that distract us and detour us away from a balanced, healthy life. Is that okay?
I'm okay, let me see. Just thinking of an example of what might be thought of as a bad desire.
Well,
like
let's say
somebody,
unhealthy. I'm not sure it's good or bad, but let's say something that's unhealthy or not productive of spiritual progress.
Well, that just sounds like a little, I don't know, euphemistic.
No. Drugs are not in and of themselves bad. A weapon is not in and of itself bad. Drugs in the hands of a doctor can be curative. A knife in the hands of a surgeon can be healing. The thing itself is not good or bad.
I'm just thinking, something basic like, if I'm desiring cocaine or I'm desiring hot dogs, to say that that's just unhealthy or, instead of a bad desire.
Okay, cocaine and hot dogs are bad. I'll go along with that. Cocaine with hot dogs, that's really bad. Now we're really talking problems here.
Well, Prabhu, I did read an article, I think this morning or yesterday, and it was about a policeman in training. He went to a crime scene where there was a bunch of like fentanyl, opioid sort of drugs, and before he even touched it, just by his getting near it, he fainted and he almost died because I guess you inhale it or even from a distance or something. So I was sorry, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
I agree with everything you're saying. I would throw that out there.
No, I'll never forget taking a plane ride once a few years ago and looking across the aisle. I swear to you, there was a man sitting there breaking all 4 principles simultaneously. He had a steak meal with a bottle of scotch or something, and he was reading a racing form and Playboy magazine. He had all 4 things covered all at once.
Okay,
I think quite the tips I'm doing there.
Aren't all these things a form of abuse, either self-abuse or abuse of others?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that, Susan? I didn't quite hear.
Okay, aren't all these things, all the regulatory principles, a form of abuse, self-abuse or abuse of others? If you eat steak, you have just abused an animal. If you smoke, you abuse your lungs. If you have sex, you're abusing your partner. If you have, all their forms of abuse. And if you are going to change, then you have to understand what abuse is, and to really elevate yourself from abuse to something a lot purer.
Well, you're doing really good tonight. That's a really provocative and I think insightful comment that hurtful habits are abusive habits. I've been evading it. Let's put that one down on the list of things that we should discuss further, because that's also a really interesting point. Thank you again, Susan. You're doing great here tonight.
I can, Prabhu, since you asked me to jot that down, I can just add something that it's sort of a comment on that sort of bridges the gap between the idea that it's like bad or that it's unhealthy. Because the word abuse, like if you look at technically the meaning of the root meaning of the word, it's not using something correctly. But of course, there's abuse and there's abuse. So
right.
Well, if we are souls, we are eternal souls. I think you're doing some damage to yourself by incorporating all this social things or all these things that are really either hurt you or hurt others.
Yeah,
it can be
again, it's a very provocative topic, because I wonder, Susan, in the scheme of things, which is more hurtful. For example, someone who may have a drug problem, but who is exemplary in so many other ways in their life, as opposed to someone who may be strict abstinence from drugs or alcohol or whatever, but they're a misogynist or they're a racist, So I think we need to be cautious. There are these subtleties of balance and things, and it's just a topic that for me has really been on my mind lately. How much someone's personal behavior should influence my appreciation for other aspects of their life. If someone is doing a lot of good in society, should I condemn them because they drink alcohol? On the other hand, I used to really love the poetry of T.S. Eliot until I found out that he was a raging anti-Semite. Now I have a really hard time reading poetry by T.S. Eliot. Or I don't know if you've been reading the news today. If you haven't been living under a rock and you're in New York, you know that Governor Cuomo has got his feet to the fire right now. It's a very challenging issue, and I think the safe path is non-judgmental. The safe path is to be very, very careful about drawing opinions about people based on hearsay or rumor or gossip. If you don't know for certain, If the only thing you're going by is what you're hearing on the news or reading in the papers, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. That may not necessarily be an infallible source of knowledge. So Atma, that goes on the list. How much to believe the news
I
report?
put it down.
Okay, good. I think we have time for maybe one more or two more questions or comments. If someone would like to jump in here. We're doing great. Really interesting stuff here.
I was just thinking that, you know, even if we do hear that somebody has done something very egregious or has some very offensive quality to them, you know, it's very tempting to see those offensive qualities or behaviors as the whole person, you know? So I think that people are all very multi-dimensional, but when it's something, when they have something about them that, you know, everybody would agree is terrible, you know, let's say if he's racist or, you know, like some of the examples that you just gave, you know, the tendency is to feel kind of justified in seeing that offensiveness as the whole person.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just very challenging to think that a person can be simultaneously, you know, a racist or might have even murdered somebody, yet have, you know, some very wonderful qualities going on for them at the same time. Yeah.
You know, it said that it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and 5 minutes to destroy it. I remember being invited to speak at the Bayview Women's Correctional Facility over on 23rd Street and 12th Avenue many years ago. It's a medium security women's prison. And afterwards, a woman walked up to me and said, you know, I killed my husband. Will my daughter have to suffer the karmic reactions from that? So that, you know, kind of knocked me for a loop. And I said, well, I'll be very glad to discuss this with you, but I just have, I'm very curious. I have to ask you, what happened? She said, I don't even know. My husband came home from work one night. I looked at him. I went over to the table by the side of our bed. I pulled out a gun that we keep there, and I shot him in the face. If someone had said to me 5 minutes before he walked in the door that I was about to do that, I would have laughed at them. So, you know, the brain works in these extraordinarily complicated ways, and we act sometimes in a manner. You know what? This is a question that Arjuna asks Krishna. He says, "Why is it that sometimes we behave in a way that's against our own best interests, even if we know better? Why does that happen?" So I won't go into a whole description just now about how Krishna answered that question, but it is, it's absolutely fascinating that good people are capable of things that they themselves would never even imagine themselves capable of doing. I mean, look, my field of research is Holocaust history. And if you learn anything at all studying the Holocaust, it's that good people can be drawn into the most heinous, inhuman kind of behavior very quickly, very readily, and even against their will. And there are some rather shocking parallels between the Nazi era and what we went through here in America just a few years ago, in terms of, demagogues weaponizing an entire population by playing on their fears and their angers. There are parallels that are worthy of discussion. So I think we may have come to the end of our time here together. I'm very grateful to you because whenever Atma invites me to talk with you all, you always have the most extraordinary insights into things, and I learn a lot. So thank you for that. I'm very grateful for your company. And I hope we'll get to see each other again sometime very soon.
Well, thank you so much, Yogeshvara Prabhu, for such a I mean, you're speaking things as they are, and so that's normal. But yet there's something courageous about your leading a discussion on this topic in the way that you have. And I'm inspired by you for doing that, and grateful. So thank you very much.
Very kind.
You're appealing to our hearts, to be Krishna conscious, because of what's really real about these Krishna conscious teachings, not just, because someone told us to do it and we're we're going to join this club instead of the other one.
Good. No, ask questions, poke at it. If you have doubts, don't let them fester inside. Talk about things, bring it out. Very good.
If the devotees and friends who are attending this evening, if you'd like to join me in expressing my profound appreciation for Yogeshvara Prabhu, this is the time. Yogeshvara Prabhu ki jai. Haribol.
Hari Bol, Hare Krishna, Hare